Welcome back to Tabletop Glory. My name is Graham Johnson, and this is a video that's been requested for a little while on how to do wood grain. Now, wood grain really isn't all that difficult, and when you start looking up a lot of videos on how to do it, some people tend to make it a little bit more difficult than it needs to be, and that's not to say that they don't get good results. I think they get wonderful results, but I was able to get these incredible results using some pretty basic techniques, and I want to go ahead and share that with you because it doesn't need to be that hard. Now for today's video, we're going to be using this wooden boat, this little rowboat from Reaper Miniatures. If you want to go ahead and pick one of those up for yourself, you absolutely can. I think it's a wonderful little addition to have for your D&D miniature collection. Now if you want to go ahead and pick one of these up, it's known as the Deadmire Fishing Boat. The SKU number on this is 44032. I actually have 4 of these in my collection, the 2 that you see me painting in today's video, and 2 that I've done already using a dry brushing technique. Now I want to head this off at the pass before we get a little bit too far into this video. There is nothing wrong with using dry brush to get a quick and easy wood grain effect. However, you'll oftentimes notice that when wood is cut into planks, it's cut with the grain, meaning the grain runs the length of the planks. And oftentimes based on the way that we do dry brushing, trying to catch the edges of the detail, that can oftentimes result in our grain being in the opposite direction that planks would have it. And so if you want to try and create a more realistic finish, this technique is going to help get you there. Now, this isn't to say that you should automatically replace your dry brushing technique with my technique. This is just what works for me when I'm trying to get kind of like a tabletop plus type of standard and kind of get a little bit more into the realm of what you might want for something that you would enter into, maybe say a painting competition. Now I've done a base coat of Gogunther fur through an airbrush. Now you could paint this all in one coat by hand. You don't have to use an airbrush. However, I'm going to be using Skeletal Horde to kind of go in and fix a lot of the issues where I didn't kind of cover everything, and that was deliberate with the airbrush. I didn't want complete and total coverage. I kind of wanted a little bit of a mix of this Skeletal Horde and the Gogunther fur kind of mixed together to create some natural tonation between darker and lighter sections of the wood to kind of really help sell the illusion of the wood grain. I feel that having not exactly the same color from one end of the plank to the other can oftentimes help to sell the illusion that this is real wood. However, the shorter the planks are and the more hardwood you're trying to paint, oftentimes I feel like that goes against you and doesn't help. So if you want to do a hard look approach, like something made out of cherry wood or something like that, then you're probably going to want to use the same color all the way throughout the same plank. Whereas here, I'm not really going for that. Also, this is a great way of showing age, that this boat has been around for a while, by showing that perhaps maybe there have been a lot of different top coats put on this boat at some point to try to seal the wood, and that can oftentimes result in there being different colors from one end of the plank to the other as well. So let's talk about the types of colors that you're going to need for today's project. Now, you don't need to use these brands exactly, and you don't need to use these specific colors exactly. You just need to use something that's in this ballpark. So we're going to be using Citadel's Zandri Dust. This is going to be kind of our mother color. This is the color that we're going to be mixing into a lot of our other colors to kind of keep everything within the same ballpark. This is also going to be our brightest color. This is going to be any chips and scratches and that sort of thing. Then we're going to be using Wood by Vallejo, Chocolate Brown by Vallejo, and Flat Earth by Vallejo. Now I do eventually switch to XV88 because it's pretty much the exact same color, and I have an abundance of this color and I need to use it up. So you'll see me using both of those in the video, but they are the exact same color. And then anytime I want to do a darker tone, I'm mixing in some Abaddon Black. However, you'll find that the chocolate brown is a pretty dark brown as is, and you shouldn't really need anything darker than that anyway. Now, one thing that is kind of important to keep in mind here is the fact that this wood grain effect is meant for something that has a lot of texture to it. So if the miniature that you're painting that you want to do this wood grain effect on doesn't have a lot of texture, something that you can do that I recommend is drawing the lines of where you want the planks to be using a fine tip marker, like a felt marker or something that you can then trace over with paint once you decide where exactly you want your planks to be, using a nice dark, either deep brown or black to paint out those planks. And then I want you to go online and look up a picture of wood grain texture for video games. These are a wonderful reference where you can see a minimum amount of colors that are used to sell the illusion of wood grain. I think this is a really great jumping off point for anyone who's having to paint things by hand. Now, a lot of the stuff we're about to cover can be used for painting wood grain by hand. However, what you need to keep in mind is, as when I'm talking about tracing lines, which we're about to start talking about, you're going to have to draw those lines yourself as opposed to having anything to trace, which means you're going to have to build up a lot of layers in order to be able to get the same wood grain effect, but you will be able to get in the same ballpark that we are getting using a miniature that has the wood grain carved into it. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pick a line. Now what I mean by this is find a bit of sculpted detail that kind of goes from one end of the wooden plank to the other end of the wooden plank, and you're just going to kind of follow along. Now I tend to use a mixture of undiluted paint as well as diluted down to a glaze. In this case you can see me here kind of using a mixture of a glaze and a heavily thinned down paint, and what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to build up my color using various layers. And that's really the secret sauce to the wood technique here, is you want to add layers. Now that's not to say that you want to cover up a lot of this darker brown that we sprayed earlier. However, the more layers that you add, the more realistic you're going to start to get. But it's also important to keep in mind that less can be more, and dependent upon how much sculpted detail is in the miniature is really going to determine how many layers of wood grain you're going to want to add. Obviously, the more that's been sculpted, the more you can add, and the less that's been sculpted, the less you're going to want to add. Now typically I'll go through with only 1 or 2 colors and do an initial pass where I'm covering up about 15 to 20% of the wood grain. And then on my second pass I may cover up some of that initial pass with a much brighter color, but I'm usually working in between the lines that I've already set out for myself, whether it be putting another line right next to that first pass or leaving a bit of a gap and putting another line down. Sometimes you can end up just doing half of a line so that you leave some of that original darker brown plus whatever you end up adding, and that can create a lot of variety in the tones that you're getting, and it can really break up some of the initial sculpted detail that's been put there by the original artist versus what you're adding, and really take something that would initially have more of a cartoonish feel and really bring it up and give it more of a realistic wood grain texture when all is said and done. You can also add little nicks and scratches using your brightest color to kind of lay in the fact that this is an object that gets used a lot, whether it could be for multiple different purposes. In the case of a campaign that I have coming up that's set in a grimdark, I like adding little scratches and nicks that could tell a story that may not ever get answered or told. How on earth did those little claw marks get in the base of that boat? Did somebody get dragged out, or did something get dragged in? The players may never know. Typically, if you're not super confident in your layers, something that you can do is you can kind of glaze over the layers, and that will kind of bring everything together. A lot of times when we're doing fabrics, that's what we do, is we put a glaze over everything to kind of bring everything together. However, with wood grain, well, although you can do that, I also find that doing a very light dry brush of your brightest color over everything, and I do mean a very, very light dry brush over everything, can do a phenomenal job at also bringing all the colors together as well, without you having to put another glaze on top of everything and maybe darkening it down beyond what you wanted for your final result. And so here we have our base coat on the left without the wood grain texture done to it, and our wood grain texture on the right. Now you'll notice that the wood grain texture that I've done on this boat is a bit on the cartoonish side, and that's fine because it fits in with the way that I paint my D&D figures. Keep in mind that the more wood grain that you add and the thinner you keep your line work, the more realistic it's going to get. But if you add too much, you might end up with a texture that looks akin to fur. When painting fur by hand and doing it freehand on something that's not been sculpted, we pretty much do the exact same thing, but just with lots of little scratch marks with various different colors, and that can build up a really nice fur texture. Here you can see some trapdoors that I painted up using the exact same techniques. However, I used a much thinner brush, and as you can see, I got these really nice thin striations throughout the wood grain texture. In addition to this, also as opposed to using a solid base coat for the entire thing, each individual plank got its own base coat, which was a mixture of watered down glazes of various different browns, and that gives us a lot of different colors to work with for our base coat. However, this is very, very time consuming, and I really only recommend doing that if you're doing something for like a display purpose or diorama, or if you're entering a competition. For a typical miniature that you're going to play a game with, honestly, it's pretty overkill. In any case, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you took something away from it. In any case, I've been Graham Johnson, this has been Tabletop Glory, and may your display case always be filled, and your pile of shame never run empty. Until next time.